Hey, stop scrolling. Tonight, we're going back, way back, to a time before Rome was anything more than a collection of mud huts on 7 soggy hills, to a civilization so advanced, so mysterious, that even the Romans who conquered them couldn't fully understand their language. You're about to become an Etruscan warrior in 396 BCE, and you're watching everything you know crumble into dust. Welcome to Bedtime. I'm so glad you're here. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Are you tucked in bed? Sitting in the dark with your phone? Good, because tonight's journey requires something from you. Surrender. Surrender to the weight of ancient bronze armor, to the smell of burning grain stores, to the helplessness of watching your entire civilization simply vanish. The Etruscans built Rome's greatest temples. They taught Romans how to read omens and bird flight. They were master metalworkers, seafarers, and architects. And yet within a few centuries, they disappeared so completely that we still can't fully translate their language. So, dim the lights, get comfortable, and prepare to live through the slow, grinding collapse of a world that history almost forgot. You wake before dawn in your stone house in Veii, and your feet touch the cold terracotta floor tiles that your grandfather laid 40 years ago. The tiles are painted with dolphins and waves, a reminder that your people once controlled the Tyrrhenian Sea, though those days grow dimmer with each passing season. Your wife still sleeps on the wool-stuffed mattress, her breathing steady and deep, and you pause to watch her in the gray light filtering through the narrow window. She doesn't know yet that today the Roman army has been spotted 3 miles south, their cooking fires visible from the city walls like a constellation of angry stars. You dress slowly, pulling on your linen undertunic first, then the heavier wool tunic, dyed with expensive Tyrian purple, a color that marks you as a member of the warrior aristocracy. Your hands shake slightly as you buckle the bronze belt. Not from fear exactly, but from the accumulated weight of 7 years defending these walls. 7 years since the Romans first laid siege to Veii. 7 years of watching your fields go fallow, your olive groves untended, your livestock slaughtered or stolen. The city that once housed 40,000 souls now holds perhaps 25,000, and every face you pass in the streets looks hollow, haunted by hunger that gnaws deeper than any sword wound. Outside, the streets are already stirring with nervous energy as other warriors prepare for another day of watching, waiting, and occasionally dying. The street outside your home is narrow, barely wide enough for 2 carts to pass, and the buildings lean toward each other like old friends sharing secrets. You join the flow of men moving toward the eastern gate, all of you silent except for the soft clink of bronze and the shuffle of leather sandals on worn stone. The smell of baking bread drifts from a few houses, families using their dwindling grain stores because who knows if there will be a tomorrow to save for. You recognize most of these men. Velthanicville, whose brother died last month from an infected wound. Arnth Velther, who lost his entire family when the Romans burned their farmhouse outside the walls. Larth Palanus, whose jokes used to make the long watch hours bearable, but who hasn't smiled in 6 months. The eastern gate looms ahead, its massive wooden doors reinforced with bronze plates that shimmer dully in the growing light. The walls of Veii are impressive, even now, 30 feet high, built from perfectly fitted tufa blocks that have stood for 3 centuries. Your ancestors built these walls believing they would last forever, and perhaps they will, but you're no longer certain your people will be here to see it. The gate guards nod as you pass through the smaller pedestrian entrance cut into the main doors. Their faces are gray with exhaustion. They've been on duty since midnight, and the night watch is always the hardest, when imagination transforms every shadow into a Roman advance party. Beyond the gate, You climb the stone stairs built into the wall's interior, your legs burning slightly from the effort. The wall walk is crowded with warriors and a few older men who serve as lookouts. From your position on the wall, you can see the entire Roman encampment spread across what used to be farmland. Their siege lines form a rough semicircle around Veii's southern and eastern approaches, a sprawling city of leather tents, wooden palisades, and cooking fires that never quite go out. You've learned to estimate their numbers by counting the century standards, the wooden poles topped with bronze hands or wreaths that mark each unit. And this morning, you count 47 visible standards, which means roughly 4,700 men, though there are surely more in the camps beyond your line of sight. They've been reinforced again. Last week there were only 39 standards. The Romans are patient, you'll grant them that much. Patient in a way that your people never quite mastered. You remember when your father took you to Rome as a boy, when Etruscans still moved freely through Latium, and Rome was just another small town that paid tribute to the Etruscan League. The Romans were farmers then, crude and rough-mannered, their Latin language harsh compared to the fluid poetry of Etruscan speech. They lived in simple wattle and daub houses, while your people built temples with terracotta roof tiles and frescoed walls. But something changed in them, something hungry and relentless. And now they squat outside your walls like a patient wolf waiting for the sheep to weaken. The sun rises properly now, burning off the morning mist, and you can see Roman soldiers beginning their morning routines, washing in the stream, drilling in formation, tending to horses, sharpening weapons. By mid-morning, you're joined on the wall by Larth, your cousin and closest friend since childhood, who brings you a cup of watered wine and a piece of dried fish that tastes mostly of salt and memory. He's 3 years older than you, and the siege has aged him worse. His hair is going gray at the temples, and he's developed a persistent cough that he tries to hide, but fails. You eat in silence for a while, watching the Romans go about their business with the industrious efficiency of ants rebuilding a disturbed hill. They're building something new today, you notice. A wooden structure near their main gate, tall posts being sunk into the ground and crossbeams being fitted. A siege tower, most likely, though they've tried those before, and your people have always managed to burn them before they reach the walls. My daughter asked about the festival yesterday, Larth says quietly, his voice rough from the cough. He means the festival of Fafloons, the wine god, which should have happened last week with dancing and wine drinking and the throwing of sacred bread into the Tiber. But there's been no festival, no celebration of any kind for 2 years now. The priests say the gods have turned their faces away from Veii, that some pollution or broken oath has caused Tinia himself to withdraw his protection. You don't know if you believe that, but you know the auguries have been consistently bad. Birds flying in wrong patterns, lightning striking from cloudless skies, sacred chickens refusing to eat. What did you tell her, you ask, though you can guess the answer. I told her the gods are sleeping, Larth says finally, and coughs again into his fist. That when they wake, everything will return to normal. Children shouldn't have to understand why their world is ending. He stares out at the Roman camp, and you follow his gaze to where a group of Roman soldiers are practicing with gladii, those short, brutal swords that have proven devastatingly effective in close combat. The Romans fight differently than your people do. Etruscans favor individual heroism, warriors choosing worthy opponents and engaging in personal combat that proves courage and skill. Romans fight as a machine, each man protecting the soldier to his left, advancing in lockstep, grinding down opposition through relentless coordination rather than individual brilliance. You think about your own son, who is 7 years old now, and has never known a time when Veii wasn't under siege. He plays war games in the streets with other children, but their games have grown darker, more realistic. They no longer pretend to be heroes from the old stories. Now they're Romans and Etruscans. And nobody wants to be the Etruscan, because the Etruscan always loses. Your wife caught him speaking Latin last week. words he'd picked up from captive Roman deserters who were kept in chains in the lower city. She slapped him for it, then cried for an hour afterward, and you held her while she sobbed about how everything is slipping away, how the language and customs that stretch back 800 years are evaporating, like morning dew under a merciless sun. The afternoon brings the heat that Latium is known for, even in autumn, and you shed your heavy wool tunic, standing watch in just your linen undertunic while sweat traces lines down your back. The Romans are working on their siege tower in earnest now. You can see teams of men hauling timber, hear the distant sound of hammers and saws carried on the wind. They'll have it finished in a week, maybe less, and then the real assault will begin. You've been through 3 major assaults already during the siege. The first was a chaotic affair, where the Romans threw ladders against the walls and tried to swarm over through sheer numbers. Your people repelled them easily, dropping stones and boiling oil, cutting down the ladder climbers with arrows and javelins. The Romans lost 300 men that day and gained nothing, except the knowledge that simple assault wouldn't work. The second assault was more sophisticated. They tried undermining the walls, digging tunnels beneath the foundations. But Veii is built on solid tufa plateau, and your engineers heard the digging through instruments that detect vibrations in stone, and they countermined, collapsing the Roman tunnels and burying the diggers alive. You still remember the sounds that came up through the earth that night, the screaming that went on for hours until it didn't. The third assault combined siege towers with a diversion attack on the western gate, but your people burned the towers with fire arrows and held the gate through sheer, desperate fighting. That was 4 months ago, and the Lucumo estimates they lost 500 men in that attempt. But they keep coming. That's the thing about Romans. They learn from failure. Evening comes as a relief, the sun dropping toward the western hills and taking its heat with it. And you're finally rotated off wall duty as fresh warriors come to replace you. Your legs are stiff from standing all day, and you descend the stone stairs slowly, feeling each step in your knees and lower back. The city streets are busier now, as people emerge from their homes to escape the day's accumulated heat. You pass the Forum, where old men sit in the cooling shadows, playing board games with colored stones, and arguing about the war with the passion of those who will never have to fight it. They fall silent as you pass, then resume their conversation in whispering lower voices once you're out of earshot. Everyone knows that the warriors on the wall hear too many truths already. No one wants to burden them further with civilian speculation and fear. You stop at the public cistern to wash, stripping to your loincloth and sluicing water over your head and body, feeling the day's sweat and dust sluice away with it. The water is rationed now. Each household gets 3 amphorae per week, barely enough for drinking and cooking, let alone washing. But the public cisterns still flow, fed by ancient springs deep beneath the city. The Romans haven't figured out how to cut off Veii's water supply, and as long as the springs flow, the city can endure. Other men are washing too, all of you maintaining a careful silence, each lost in private thoughts about wives and children, about diminishing food stores, about how long this can possibly continue. You arrive home as the last light is fading, and your wife Ramtha is preparing the evening meal over the small hearth in your main room. She looks up as you enter, and her face shows relief, followed quickly by the practiced neutrality of someone who has learned not to ask too many questions. The meal is simple: barley porridge with a few herbs, a small amount of goat cheese, and bread that's more sawdust than wheat flour at this point. You eat together in near silence, the only sounds the scrape of wooden spoons against clay bowls and the crackle of the fire. Your son Larth, named for your cousin, sits between you, his small face serious as he chews each bite methodically, already understanding at age 7 that food must not be wasted, that every grain of barley represents a calculation of how many more days the city can hold. After dinner, Ramtha lights the oil lamps, just 2 because oil is precious, and she sits with her loom, working on a piece of cloth that she's been weaving for 3 months, using thread she spins herself from the wool of a sheep your family slaughtered 2 years ago. The rhythmic of the loom is soothing, a sound that connects this moment to 10,000 nights before the siege, to generations of Etruscan women working looms in the evening while their men mended weapons or told stories. Your son brings you his wax tablet, and you help him practice his letters, both Etruscan and Latin, because you're pragmatic enough to understand that Latin may be the language of his future, even if that reality breaks your heart. You lie awake long after Ramtha and Larth have fallen asleep, listening to the night sounds of Veii, dogs barking in distant streets, the call of the night watch marking the hours, the occasional clatter of something falling or breaking, someone's muffled crying through the shared wall with your neighbors. Your mind won't stop calculating. The grain reserves will last perhaps 2 more months if rationing continues at current levels. But winter is coming, and people will need more food to maintain body heat. So realistically, you're looking at 6 weeks, maybe 7. The city's wealth is still considerable. Your people have been master traders for centuries, and the treasury holds bronze and gold enough to buy supplies, if any would sell to you. But the Romans have blockaded the roads so thoroughly that no merchant can reach Veii, and your people's traditional allies have either been conquered or have chosen neutrality rather than risk Rome's wrath. You think about the options that keep circulating in whispered conversations. Surrender. Unthinkable. Romans don't accept surrenders. They make examples. Breakthrough. Suicide. Even if some warriors escaped, they'd leave their families to Roman revenge. Negotiation. Pointless. Rome wants Veii destroyed, not subdued. Divine intervention. The priests keep promising, but the gods remain conspicuously silent. You think about the Romans sleeping in their camp 3 miles away, and you wonder if their commander, Marcus Furius Camillus, lies awake running similar calculations, or if he sleeps soundly, knowing that time is entirely on his side. Patience is a weapon, and Rome has learned to wield it perfectly. Morning comes too quickly, gray light seeping through the window, and you force yourself up despite having slept perhaps 3 hours. You move through your routine automatically. Dress, pray, arm, leave. And you kiss Ramtha's forehead before departing. She doesn't wake, or pretends not to, and you're grateful because you have no words of comfort to offer her today. The streets are quieter than yesterday, fewer people about, and those who are moving look more ghost-like, hollow-eyed, moving from necessity rather than purpose. You pass a house where someone has died during the night. You can tell from the closed shutters and the small group of mourners sitting outside. And you wonder briefly if it was illness, starvation, or simple despair. All 3 are claiming more victims as the siege extends. At the wall, you find the situation changed overnight. The Roman siege tower has been moved forward during darkness, advanced several hundred paces closer to the walls under cover of night. It's an impressive feat of engineering. The tower is mobile, riding on massive wooden wheels, tall enough to overlook Veii's battlements. You can see the shields hung on its sides for protection, the covered approach ramp that will extend once it reaches the walls, the fire-resistant hides that cover its wooden frame. Your stomach tightens with the realization that the next assault will come soon, perhaps within days. The Lucumo must be informed immediately. You turn to send a runner, but he's already there. The commander's scouts spotted the movement at dawn, and the entire military leadership is being summoned for an emergency council. The afternoon brings the heat that Latium is known for, even in autumn, and you shed your heavy wool tunic, standing watch in just your linen undertunic while sweat traces lines down your back. The Romans are working on their siege tower in earnest now. You can see teams of men hauling timber, hear the distant sound of hammers and saws carried on the wind. They'll have it finished in a week, maybe less, and then the real assault will begin. You've been through 3 major assaults already during the siege. The first was a chaotic affair, where the Romans threw ladders against the walls and tried to swarm over through sheer numbers. Your people repelled them easily, dropping stones and boiling oil, cutting down the ladder climbers with arrows and javelins. The Romans lost 300 men that day, and gained nothing, except the knowledge that simple assault wouldn't work. The second assault was more sophisticated. They tried undermining the walls, digging tunnels beneath the foundations. But Veii is built on solid tufa plateau, and your engineers heard the digging through instruments that detect vibrations in stone, and they countermined, collapsing the Roman tunnels and burying the diggers alive. You still remember the sounds that came up through the earth that night, the screaming that went on for hours until it didn't. The third assault combined siege towers with a diversion attack on the western gate. But your people burned the towers with fire arrows and held the gate through sheer, desperate fighting. That was 4 months ago, and the Lucumo estimates they lost 500 men in that attempt. But they keep coming. That's the thing about Romans. They learn from failure. Veii continues his briefing, outlining the defensive strategy. Concentrate maximum forces at the tower's likely landing point. Maintain skeleton crews on other wall sections. Prepare fire arrows and oil pots. Position the best archers to target the tower's assault ramp the moment it drops. It's a sound plan as far as it goes, but you can hear what he's not saying. That this will likely be a decisive battle. That if the Romans establish a foothold on the walls, the city will fall within hours. The Etruscan way of warfare has always emphasized quality over quantity, individual heroism over mass tactics. But quality requires strength and training, and your people are losing both day by day. The Romans, by contrast, rotate fresh troops forward regularly, their supply lines from Rome ensuring adequate food, and their numbers seem endless. For every century you see destroyed, 2 more appear to take its place. "We need a sortie," someone says from across the chamber. You turn to see Arnth Cainus, a young warrior whose family controls the city's bronze workshops. He's passionate, brave, foolishly young in the way that makes old men wistful and irritated simultaneously. A night attack on the siege tower while it's still in construction. Burn it before it reaches the walls. Veii regards him with the patient exhaustion of someone who has heard this proposal a dozen times. "We've attempted 3 sorties," he says quietly. "Each time we lost more men than we could afford." The Romans expect sorties now. They have counterforces staged specifically to trap our warriors in the open, where their numbers advantage is decisive. The council disperses, with no new decisions made, which is itself a decision. The defensive plan stands, and all that remains is waiting for the Romans to make their move. You climb back to the surface, emerging into afternoon sunlight that feels aggressive after the lamplit darkness below. Your shift on the wall doesn't begin for 3 hours, so you decide to visit the Temple of Uni, needing something you can't quite name. Reassurance. Perspective. A reminder that your people have survived challenges before. The temple sits on the highest point of the city, its columns visible from everywhere in Veii. A massive structure that took 70 years to build and represents the pinnacle of Etruscan architectural achievement. The roof tiles are terracotta, molded and painted to depict the goddess in various poses, and the wooden doors are covered in bronze reliefs, showing scenes from Etruscan mythology. Inside, the temperature drops, and the light changes to something filtered and sacred. The cult statue of Uni towers at the far end, 15 feet tall, made of wood covered in gold leaf, the goddess wearing a crown shaped like a city wall and holding a pomegranate in her upraised hand. A few supplicants kneel before her, mostly women and elderly men, their prayers creating a murmur like distant water. You approach the altar where a priest tends the eternal flame that has burned here for 300 years, fed by oils extracted from sacred trees. The priest is ancient, his face so lined it looks like cracked mud, his hands trembling as he adds oil to the lamp. He sees you and nods recognition, but doesn't speak. Priests understand that warriors carry their prayers inside them. Too heavy for words. You leave the temple feeling no better, but no worse, which is perhaps all anyone can hope for in times like these. And you make your way to the market district to see if any food is available for purchase. The market is a shadow of what it was. Before the siege, this plaza would have been packed with stalls selling everything from Syrian glass to Spanish metals to African ivory. Etruscan merchants being among the ancient world's most skilled traders. Now there are perhaps 20 stalls, all selling the same things. Dried beans, barley, millet, occasionally some salted fish or preserved meat at prices that make your eyes water. A small sack of barley that cost 1 bronze coin before the siege now costs 20. You watch a woman negotiating desperately with a merchant, offering jewelry, a beautiful necklace of amber beads that must be a family heirloom, for a few pounds of grain. The merchant barely glances at it before shaking his head. Jewelry can't be eaten. You're about to leave when you spot your cousin Larth's wife, Tana, at a far stall. She's bargaining for something, her voice rising with frustration. Annoyed, and you move closer to see what's happening. She's trying to buy medicine. You can see the merchant's display of dried herbs, powders in clay jars, tinctures in small bottles. Larth's cough has worsened then, progressed from annoying to dangerous. The merchant is demanding an outrageous price, knowing that desperate people pay anything. You intervene, stepping beside Tana and using your warrior status to pressure the merchant. Not explicitly threatening, but letting your presence and your weapons speak. The merchant's price drops by half immediately. Tana shoots you a grateful look as she completes the transaction, pressing most of her remaining coins into the merchant's palm for a small bottle of herbal mixture that might or might not help Larth breathe easier. Back on the wall for the evening watch, you find the mood among the defenders darker than this morning. Word has spread about the siege tower's advance, and everyone understands what it means. The waiting is almost over. The final test approaches. You take your position and begin the familiar routine of scanning, watching, calculating. But your mind keeps drifting to Thana's desperate face, to Larth's failing health, to your own son's thin frame. How long can children survive on barley porridge and hope? The Romans below seem to sense the change in mood. They're working with increased energy, adding final touches to the siege tower, moving additional supplies forward, forming up units for inspection. You recognize the signs of an army preparing for major action. Tomorrow, perhaps, or the day after. Soon. Beside you, a young warrior you don't know well. He's from one of the farming families that took refuge in the city when the siege began, suddenly speaks. Why are we fighting? He asks. Not really addressing you specifically, but throwing the question into the air, like a stone into a well, waiting to hear how deep the darkness goes. I mean, what's the point? Rome will take the city eventually. Everyone knows it. We're just choosing how many of us die first. You should reprimand him for defeatist talk, but you don't. Instead, you stare out at the Roman camp and try to formulate an answer that isn't a lie. We fight because we're Etruscan, you say finally. Because our fathers and their fathers held these walls. Because surrender means slavery for everyone who survives it. Because Rome needs to learn that taking Etruscan cities costs Roman blood. It sounds hollow even to you, but it's the truth as far as it goes. Night falls, and you're relieved by the midnight watch. But instead of going home, you find yourself wandering Veii's streets in darkness. The city feels different at night during the siege. More honest somehow. As if the darkness strips away the daylight's pretense that everything is normal. You pass houses where women sing lullabies to hungry children, trying to convince them that sleep is as good as food. You hear arguments through thin walls, couples fighting about whether to try escaping, whether to kill their children mercifully before the Romans arrive, whether the gods have truly abandoned Veii, or merely testing faith. At one corner, you encounter a group of men sharing a wineskin, and they offer you a drink. It's terrible wine, sour and watered, but you accept out of solidarity. They don't speak, just pass the skin in silence, each man alone with his thoughts. You eventually make your way to the city's highest point, where the Temple of Uni stands like a promise that can't quite be kept. And you sit on the temple steps, staring out across Veii. From here, you can see the entire city spread below. The rectangular grid of streets, the forums and temples, the houses with their terracotta roofs, the workshops and granaries and cisterns. 800 years of Etruscan civilization contained in these walls, and Rome is going to erase it. Not immediately, but eventually. Even if Veii survives this siege, Rome will return. Rome always returns. The Romans have developed a new kind of warfare, you realize. Not just tactical or strategic, but existential. They don't want to defeat Etruscan armies. They want to eliminate Etruscan existence, to absorb everything valuable and destroy everything else. You finally return home in the darkest hours before dawn, moving quietly through the streets where nothing stirs except occasional dogs and the wall sentry's distant calls. Ramtha wakes when you enter, and without speaking, she lights a lamp and prepares a cup of warm water with honey. She's been hoarding a small jar of honey for months, using it only for special occasions or emergencies, and apparently, she judges this moment to qualify. You drink it gratefully, the sweetness shocking your tongue after weeks of bland porridge and salted fish. She sits beside you on the sleeping platform, and you lean against her, letting her strength support you for once, instead of always being the strong one. "They're coming soon," you say quietly. She nods against your shoulder. She already knows. Everyone knows. The whole city can feel the approaching storm like animals sensing an earthquake before it strikes. "I love you," she says. And the simple statement carries weight, because Etruscan marriages are often arranged for political or economic advantage, and expressing love directly is not customary. You're supposed to demonstrate it through actions, through running a household well, through producing legitimate children. But the siege has stripped away the customs, leaving only the essential things. "I love you too," you respond. And you're surprised to feel tears gathering in your eyes. The first tears you've allowed yourself in months. Not tears of fear or grief, but simply of being seen, of having someone acknowledge what you're carrying. She holds you while you shake silently, and your son sleeps undisturbed on his mattress. And for a few minutes, your house contains something like peace, despite the Romans sleeping just 3 miles away. Morning arrives without regard for whether you're ready for it, and you force yourself through your routine on 2 hours of broken sleep. Your body feels heavy, disconnected, moving through deep water. But training takes over and you function despite the exhaustion. At the wall, the situation has evolved overnight. The Roman siege tower has advanced another 100 paces and is now close enough that you can see details. The iron plates reinforcing its corners, the multiple firing platforms inside, the assault ramp mechanism, the covering shields. Behind it, the Roman forces are forming up in attack positions. This isn't a drill or a feint. This is the real assault, and it's coming today. Messengers run along the wall spreading the alert, and you see defenders scrambling to their positions, carrying extra weapons, oil pots, buckets of stones. The Lucumo appears on the wall, making his way along the line, speaking briefly to each warrior, offering words of encouragement that everyone knows are meaningless but appreciates anyway. When he reaches you, Velkalizna grips your shoulder and looks you in the eye. "You're one of my best," he says simply. "I'm counting on you to hold this section no matter what comes up that tower." You nod, not trusting your voice to remain steady, and he moves on to the next warrior. You turn back to face the Roman lines, and you see them beginning to move. Sentries forming into cohorts, officers shouting commands, the siege tower starting its final advance, pulled by teams of oxen while soldiers push from behind. The tower moves ponderously but steadily, closing the distance to Veii's walls at a rate of perhaps 30 paces per hour. You have hours to wait, but those hours will pass, and then the Romans will be here, and everything you are will be tested. The siege tower reaches the wall at midday, exactly as the Lucumo predicted. The Romans are nothing if not methodical. The moment it stops moving, the assault begins from multiple directions simultaneously. The tower itself is the main threat. Its assault ramp drops with a crash of wood on stone, and Roman soldiers pour across it onto the wall, shields locked in formation, gladii stabbing low and efficient. You're waiting with 24 other warriors, and you crash into them like waves meeting, bronze on bronze, the sound deafening. Your training takes over. Thrust, slash, dodge, block, each movement flowing into the next without conscious thought. A Roman soldier's sword catches your breastplate and skids off, the force of it staggering you backward. But Larth is there, his spear taking the Roman in the throat, and you recover and push forward. The fighting is nothing like the heroic tales told at festivals. There's no glory, no divine intervention, no dramatic single combats. It's just grinding violence, men pressing against each other in a space too small for everyone, blades finding flesh, bodies falling, the wounded trampled by those still fighting. You kill a Roman, or you think you do, it's hard to tell in the chaos, and then another. And then you lose track because there's just the next enemy, and the next, and the next. Blood makes the stones slippery. The noise is overwhelming. Metal on metal, the thud of bodies hitting stone. Officers shouting orders that no one can hear. Your world narrows to a space 5 feet wide where survival depends on the next second, and the second after that. The initial assault lasts perhaps 20 minutes before the Romans pull back to regroup, but it feels like hours. You're left standing on a section of wall littered with bodies. More Roman than Etruscan, but too many Etruscan nonetheless. Your chest heaves as you try to catch your breath. And now that the immediate fighting has stopped, pain floods in from a dozen places you didn't realize you were injured. The wound on your left arm is bleeding steadily. Not life-threatening, but needing attention. Someone passes you a water skin and you drink greedily, then pour water over your face. And when you wipe your eyes, you see that your hands are shaking violently. The aftermath of combat adrenaline. Around you, warriors check wounds, retrieve weapons from the dead, drag bodies aside to clear fighting space for the next assault. The Romans will come again. They always come again. And you have perhaps an hour to prepare. Larth sits heavily against the parapet, coughing worse than ever, and you see blood mix with his phlegm. The exertion of combat has accelerated whatever illness is consuming him. You crouch beside him and try to help, but he waves you away. "I'm fine," he says, which is obviously a lie, but what can you do? The city's medicine supplies are nearly exhausted, and healers prioritize warriors who might recover fully for the next fight. You help him to his feet and guide him toward the wall stairs. He needs rest, even if he won't admit it, but he resists. "I can still fight," he insists. And maybe he can, for a little while longer, until he can't. You've seen this pattern before. Warriors pushing past their limits until they simply break. The second assault comes faster than expected, the Romans giving you barely 40 minutes to recover. This time, they've learned from the first attempt. Instead of funneling all their forces through the tower's single ramp, they're also throwing ladder parties at the wall on either side, forcing you to divide your defenses. You're assigned to hold against a ladder assault, and you position yourself above where a Roman ladder slams against the wall with a shuddering thud. The first Roman soldier up is young, maybe 18, his face showing the same fear you saw in the young Etruscan warrior yesterday. You almost hesitate, but training overrides empathy. You thrust down with your javelin, catching him in the shoulder, and he falls backward, taking 2 more soldiers down with him. The ladder falls away from the wall, and you allow yourself a moment of satisfaction before another ladder appears 10 feet to your right. This pattern repeats for what feels like hours. Ladders appear, you repel them with javelins, stones, occasionally arrows. They fall back, more ladders come. It's exhausting, repetitive work, and the Romans seem to have infinite ladders, infinite soldiers willing to climb them. Your javelin arm grows heavy, your throws less accurate. You switch to dropping stones, which requires less precision, and you score hits more by volume than skill. A Roman arrow whistles past your head, close enough that you feel the air displacement, and you drop below the parapet for a moment, breathing heavily before popping up to throw another stone. Around you, warriors are falling. Not many, but steadily. A constant attrition that Veii cannot afford. By late afternoon, the Romans pull back again, and you're given another brief respite. The situation on the wall has deteriorated significantly. You've lost perhaps 30% of your defenders, including several of your best warriors. Bodies are everywhere, and there aren't enough unwounded men to clear them all, so you fight surrounded by the dead. The smell is overwhelming in the autumn heat. Blood, excrement. Bodies release their bowels when they die. Fear sweat, and the acrid smell of smoke from fires burning somewhere in the lower city. You learn that a Roman mining team broke through beneath the southern wall, and although they were repulsed, they set fire to several buildings before being killed. The city is now under attack from 3 directions simultaneously, and your defenses are stretched to breaking. Veii appears again, and you're shocked by his appearance. The old commander has taken multiple wounds, his ornate armor dented and bloodstained, his face showing a grimness beyond even the situation's horror. He gathers the surviving warriors in your section and gives new orders. Hold until nightfall. After dark, we'll attempt a organized withdrawal to the inner citadel. The outer walls cannot be held with our current numbers. The words are tactical, professional, but their meaning is clear. Veii is being abandoned in stages, each wall given up as it becomes untenable, the defenders contracting into smaller and smaller spaces until there's nowhere left to contract to. You nod understanding and watch the Lucamo move on to the next group, and you wonder if this is the last time you'll see him alive. The final hours on the outer wall are a blur of violence and desperation. The Romans, sensing that Veii's defense is crumbling, throw everything at you. Another tower assault, more ladder parties, covering archery fire so thick it darkens the sky. You fight mechanically, no longer thinking, just reacting to each threat as it appears. At some point, darkness falls. You don't notice the transition, just suddenly realize you're fighting by torch and moonlight. Shadows making everything harder. Dangerous. You kill more Romans, or think you do, but honestly, you're not tracking anymore. Your left arm is completely numb. Your right arm is cramping from constant sword work. Your legs barely hold you upright. Still, you fight. Because stopping means dying. And some stubborn part of you refuses to give these Roman bastards the satisfaction. Then the horn sounds. 3 long notes that mean organized withdrawal. Officers appear, shouting orders, directing the retreat. You're designated as rear guard, which makes sense because you're on the outer wall and someone has to cover the withdrawal. You position yourself at the top of the stairs leading down into the city. And with 10 other warriors, you hold this choke point while the remaining defenders stream past you, heading for the inner citadel. Romans pursue, scrambling over the walls now that resistance is collapsing, and you fight them at the stairhead. It's brutal work in the confined space. No room for technique, just hacking and stabbing whoever comes close. One of your rearguard companions falls, then another, then 3 more in quick succession. You're down to 5 warriors holding the stairs, then 4, then 3. An officer appears behind you shouting that everyone's through, withdraw now. And you don't question or argue. You simply turn and run, leaving the stairhead to the Romans because there's no point dying for ground you can't hold. You stumble down the stairs, your exhausted legs barely functioning, and you hear the Romans pouring down behind you. But then something crashes above. The defenders have rigged the stairway to collapse, and tons of stone come down, blocking the passage and burying dozens of Romans. The sound is tremendous, a thunder that shakes the ground, and when the dust clears, you're cut off from the Romans, at least temporarily. You find yourself in a narrow street in the lower city, surrounded by other exhausted defenders, everyone leaning on walls and each other, gasping for breath. Someone counts heads. You've lost 2/3 of the outer wall defenders. 2/3. The numbers are staggering, unsustainable. An officer organizes you into a new formation and leads you toward the inner citadel, a smaller, fortified area around the city's temple district that represents Veii's final defensive position. As you move through the city streets, you pass civilians evacuating with whatever they can carry, crying children, women loaded with bundles, old men supporting each other. Everyone streaming toward the citadel like refugees fleeing a flood. You see your street, and on impulse you break from formation, ignoring the officer's shout, and run to your house. The door is open, the interior dark. "Ramtha!" you shout, and relief floods you when she appears, Larth clutched in her arms. She's prepared, a bundle of essentials, food and valuables. You take the bundle, and together your family joins the evacuation. Just 3 more refugees among thousands. The inner citadel is chaos. Thousands of civilians crammed into a space meant for hundreds. Defensive positions being hastily reinforced. Fires burning everywhere as people cook meals and warm themselves against the autumn night's chill. Your family finds a corner in a portico near the Temple of Uni, claiming a tiny space that will be home for however long this lasts. Ramtha spreads a blanket and sits Larth down. Then she turns to you and really looks at you for the first time. Her face crumbles, and she begins crying while trying to examine your wounds. "I'm alive," you tell her. And it's true, as far as it goes. She finds a healer, an old woman working through a line of wounded warriors, and the healer examines you professionally. "Left arm might be permanent nerve damage," she says clinically. "Multiple lacerations, extensive bruising, possible internal bleeding, exhaustion, dehydration. You should rest for a week minimum." You almost laugh at that. Rest, as if such a thing exists. The healer cleans your wounds as best she can, stitches the deeper cuts with practiced efficiency, and wraps everything in clean bandages from rapidly dwindling supplies. She gives you a small cup of bitter liquid, willow bark tea for pain, and tells you to drink slowly. You obey, and the pain recedes slightly, becoming manageable rather than overwhelming. Ramtha brings you food, barley porridge and a small piece of salted fish, and you eat mechanically, tasting nothing, but your body accepts the fuel gratefully. Your son sits beside you, silent, his small hand occasionally reaching out to touch your leg, as if confirming you're real. Night deepens, and around you, the citadel settles into uneasy rest. Thousands of people trying to sleep while knowing the Romans are just outside the walls, preparing for tomorrow's assault. You wake to gray dawn light and the sound of Roman trumpets, and immediately you know the final assault is beginning. Around you, the citadel rouses, warriors grabbing weapons, civilians huddling closer together, children crying, priests at the Temple of Uni conducting desperate prayers for divine intervention that everyone knows won't come. An officer finds you and orders you to the western wall of the citadel, and you obey despite Ramtha's protests. Your left arm is still useless, wrapped tightly to your body to prevent it from hampering you, and you carry only your sword and a dagger because that's all you can effectively manage one-handed. Other wounded warriors join you, all of you barely functional, assigned to secondary positions because there aren't enough healthy warriors to cover all the walls. You're defending Etruscan civilization with cripples, and the absurdity would be funny if it weren't so tragic. The citadel walls are lower than the outer walls, only 20 feet high, built centuries ago when Veii was smaller. And the Romans bring their remaining siege equipment close. Towers, ladders, battering rams against the gates. But they also do something unexpected. Their commander, Marcus Furius Camillus, appears under a white flag and calls for Veii's surrender. Velkalisna, miraculously still alive though heavily wounded, appears on the wall to receive the message. Camillus's terms are brutal. Immediate surrender. All adult males to be sold into slavery. Women and children to be absorbed into Roman households as servants. The city to be completely destroyed. Its temples demolished, its wealth seized. In return, he promises that lives will be spared. Slavery instead of execution. It's a hideous choice, but it's a choice. Velkalisna refuses without hesitation. Some things, he declares, are worse than death. The Roman assault begins immediately after Camillus withdraws his offer, and it's overwhelming from the first moment. They attack all four walls simultaneously, committing their full strength, and there simply aren't enough defenders to hold everywhere. You fight one-handed, which is desperately disadvantageous. You can't use a shield effectively, can't parry and strike in combination, can't leverage your strength properly. But you fight anyway, using your sword like a club when necessary, positioning yourself in corners where attackers can only come from one direction, making your disability work for you as much as possible. Romans come up ladders and over the walls, and you kill them where you can, wound them when you can't kill, and die a little bit with each exchange because you know this is lost. To your left, a section of wall is breached. Too few defenders, too many attackers, and Romans pour through. To your right, another breach. The citadel's defenses are collapsing not because defenders are cowards, but because mathematics is inexorable. There aren't enough Etruscans to hold the walls. You hear fighting spreading into the citadel interior now, screaming from the temple porticos where civilians shelter, and your heart clenches with terror for Ramtha and Larth. An officer shouts for general retreat to the temple itself, the very last position, and you pull back, moving carefully because turning your back on Romans is suicide. You retreat toward the Temple of Uni, and around you, Veii is falling in real time. Romans swarming through the streets, civilian refugees fleeing toward the temple's promise of sanctuary that might or might not be honored. You reach the Temple of Uni's steps and find organized chaos. Hundreds of civilians packed onto the stairs and portico, a thin line of warriors holding the temple entrance, priests continuing their prayers with admirable dedication or damnable foolishness, you're not sure which. You spot Ramtha and Larth pressed against a column halfway up the stairs, and you force your way through the crowd to them, pushing past desperate people with your one good arm. Ramtha sees you and her face transforms from terror to relief to new terror as she registers your condition. You're dying on your feet, and she knows it. But there's nothing to be done. You press your back against the column beside her, facing outward, sword ready, and you wait for the Romans to come. Because they will come. They always come. And when they do, at least you'll die with your family close. The Romans mass at the base of the temple stairs, but they pause. Even they seem hesitant to assault a sacred temple. Or maybe they're just regrouping for a final coordinated push. In that brief pause, Veii appears beside you, the old Lucumo somehow still functioning, despite being so wounded he should be dead. He's holding the city's sacred standards, the bronze wolf of Veii, the golden hand of Tenia, the silver star of Uni, symbols of Etruscan authority and divine favor. "I'm surrendering these to Camillus," he says quietly. "It's over. We lost. You want to argue, want to say you can still fight. But you look at the civilians around you, old men, women, children, all of them helpless. And you know he's right. This stopped being a battle and became a massacre. And continuing to fight means everyone dies, instead of some surviving as slaves." Veii descends the stairs slowly, carrying the sacred standards, and the Romans part to let him through to Camillus. You watch from above as the old Lucumo kneels before the Roman commander, not in submission, but in formal surrender ritual, and presents the standards. Camillus accepts them with appropriate solemnity, and then he issues orders that spread through the Roman ranks. The assault stops. Romans lower their weapons. For a moment, everyone is frozen in the sudden absence of combat. And then people begin to realize they're not going to die immediately, and crying starts. Relief, grief, exhaustion, all releasing in a wave of emotion that sweeps through the refugees on the temple steps. Ramtha is crying, clutching you and Larth, and you realize you're crying too, tears cutting tracks through the blood and dirt on your face. Roman soldiers begin organizing the Etruscans, separating men from women and children, forming groups, preparing for the long process of converting a defeated enemy population into Roman property. You're pulled away from Ramtha despite her protests, despite Larth screaming, and you can't even fight back, because your body is finally given out, your legs collapsing, Roman soldiers catching you and dragging you toward where other captured warriors are being assembled. You crane your neck back, trying to keep Ramtha in sight, and the last thing you see before losing consciousness is her face, watching you being taken, holding Larth, who reaches toward you, crying, "Papa, Papa," in a voice that will echo in your dreams forever. You wake in darkness, lying on hard ground, and for a moment you don't remember anything. Then memory crashes back. The battle, the surrender, the separation. And you try to sit up, sending fresh pain through every part of your body. You're in some kind of holding area, you realize. A makeshift prison, probably in one of Veii's own buildings, repurposed by the Romans. Around you in the darkness, other men breathe, cough, groan with pain. The air smells of blood, sweat, and despair. Someone near you says, "You're awake," and you recognize Larth's voice, your cousin. "They're bringing healers tomorrow," he continues. "Romans keep valuable slaves alive." His voice is bitter, and it sparks answering bitterness in you. You survived the battle only to become property, breathing livestock for Roman masters. You learn over the next days what has happened to Veii. The city is being systematically demolished, buildings torn down, temples desecrated, walls dismantled, stone by stone. The Romans are erasing Veii from existence, ensuring it can never challenge Rome again. The population has been sorted. Men of military age are being sold to slave dealers who arrive from across Italy. Women and children are being distributed to Roman households. The elderly are simply released to fend for themselves, which effectively means slow death. You never see Ramtha or your son again. Roman officers explain with bureaucratic efficiency that families are separated to prevent resistance. Slaves bonded by family ties are more likely to rebel, so Rome tears those bonds apart as policy. Your wife and child are somewhere, alive you hope, but they might as well be dead because you'll never find them in the vast Roman slave system. 3 weeks after the surrender, you're sold. A slave dealer examines you like livestock, checking your teeth, testing your remaining strength, assessing your work capacity, despite your permanent injuries. Your left arm is useless, and your limp means you can't do heavy labor. But one-handed, you can still perform skilled work, and your literacy in both Etruscan and Latin makes you valuable for certain tasks. You're purchased by a Roman merchant named Gaius Flavius, who needs clerks to manage his trading business. The price is insultingly low. You were worth more as a warrior's armor than as a damaged slave. But Gaius pays it, and you're his property. You're taken from the holding prison, marched through Veii one last time, and you're struck by what the Romans have done. The city is already half demolished. Temples pulled down, houses destroyed, streets torn up. 800 years of Etruscan civilization is being erased in weeks, and you're watching it happen. The march to Rome takes 3 days, and you see other aspects of Roman dominance. The roads they've built, better than Etruscan roads, you admit, reluctantly. The military colonies they've established. The infrastructure of conquest. Rome is transforming Italy, imposing Roman order on the diverse peoples who lived here for millennia. At night, chained to other slaves, you lie awake, thinking about what's been lost. Not just Veii, but the entire Etruscan way of life. Your people taught Rome everything. How to build temples, how to read omens, how to organize cities, how to write. And now Rome is destroying its teachers, taking what it wants and discarding the rest. The Romans are efficient at everything, including cultural annihilation. Life as Gaius's clerk slave is bearable, which makes it somehow worse than if it were purely miserable. You work in a comfortable office in Rome, keeping trade records, writing letters, calculating accounts. Your mind is engaged, which means you can't escape into numbness. Gaius treats you decently by Roman standards. You're fed adequately, you have a small clean room in the household. You're not beaten unless you fail at your tasks, which you never do because you're competent, and competence is your only remaining form of resistance. You learn to live with the constant low-grade humiliation of slavery. Being property, being called boy despite being in your 30s, having no rights, no privacy, no future beyond what your master decides. You perform your tasks with mechanical precision and try not to think about anything else. But sometimes information crosses your desk that breaks your careful numbness. You're recording a grain shipment from Campania, and the document mentions that the grain is grown on land seized from Etruscan owners who were enslaved or killed. You're tallying slaves purchased for Gaius's business, and you see a woman from Veii listed, age 30, with a 7-year-old son. And your hands shake so badly you ruin the wax tablet and have to start over, wondering if it's Ramtha and Larth, knowing you'll never know for certain. You're writing a letter for Gaius to another merchant, discussing the demolition of Etruscan temples and the value of their bronze fittings once melted down. And you have to stop because tears are blurring your vision. And you're supposed to be past crying, but apparently you're not.
Years pass. You're good at your work, which means Gaius relies on you, which means he'll never sell you or free you, because competent clerks are valuable. You've become fluent in Roman commercial practices, Roman law, Roman everything. You know your conquerors better than they know themselves. You watch Rome grow, expanding its dominion across Italy, absorbing the Samnites, pressuring the Greek cities in the south. Always growing, always conquering. The Etruscan cities fall, one by one. Volsini, Perusia, Arretium, each defeated or subsumed.
each losing its independence and much of its culture. The Etruscan language is dying. You hear it less each year, as people switch to Latin for commerce, law, and eventually even daily speech. Your people are vanishing, not through genocide, but through assimilation, which is perhaps more complete because it leaves no bodies to mark what was lost. You're now in your early 40s, prematurely aged by wounds and sorrow. Your left arm has atrophied completely, a withered thing you barely notice anymore. Your limp is worse.
One day, in your 20th year of slavery, you're working in Gaius's office when a visitor arrives. A Roman official conducting a census of enslaved Etruscans remaining in Rome, documenting the last speakers of a dying language. You're interviewed. Where were you born? Veii. What was your family's status? Warrior aristocracy. Do you speak Etruscan? Yes. Can you write it? Yes. Do you remember Etruscan religious practices? Yes. When did you last speak Etruscan with another person? 3 years ago. The official records everything with bureaucratic precision, and you realize you're being cataloged like an extinct animal, a specimen of something that no longer exists in the wild. The Etruscans as a people are finished. Some bloodlines survive in Roman families, some cultural practices persist in Roman religion, some words entered Latin vocabulary, but the civilization that built Veii, that taught Rome architecture and divination, that controlled central Italy for centuries, is gone. After the official leaves, you sit at your desk, unable to work, staring at the blank wax tablet. You think about your son, who would be 27 now if he's still alive, probably speaking only Latin, possibly not even knowing his Etruscan heritage, certainly not remembering his father. You think about Ramtha and whether she survived slavery or found some measure of peace in death. You think about Veii, its stones scattered, its temples demolished, its memory preserved only in Roman histories, written by conquerors who will never understand what they destroyed. And you think about yourself, the last warrior of Veii. Except you're not a warrior anymore, haven't been for 20 years. You're just an aging slave who remembers things no one else cares about. You die on an unremarkable spring day in your 54th year, sitting at your desk in Gaius's office. Your heart simply stops. No drama, no final battle, just the quiet end of a body that has endured more than it was built for. They find you slumped over a half-finished account ledger, the stylus still in your hand, a streak of wet wax where your hand dragged across the tablet as you fell. Gaius is annoyed at the disruption to his business. You were valuable, and training a replacement will be expensive and time-consuming. Your body is burned in the common cremation grounds outside Rome, where slaves are disposed of. No marker, no ceremony. No one to remember your name or mourn your passing. The smoke from your pyre mingles with smoke from cooking fires and other cremations. Indistinguishable. Forgotten. But something of you persists in ways you never knew. The census records mentioning you survive in Roman archives, and 2,000 years later, scholars studying the Etruscan language will reference those records, piecing together fragments of a lost culture. The defensive techniques you used on Veii's walls will be studied by Roman military engineers and incorporated into Roman siege warfare, spreading across the Mediterranean. Your son, whom you never saw after the surrender, lived to old age as a freedman's freedman, his children and grandchildren becoming fully Roman, but carrying Etruscan blood that still flows in Italian veins today. Veii itself, demolished and abandoned, will one day be excavated by archaeologists who will marvel at Etruscan engineering, art, and culture, bringing knowledge of your people to a future you couldn't imagine. The Etruscans vanished, but they didn't disappear. They were absorbed, transformed, made part of something larger.
Rome took Etruscan temples and made them Roman temples. Rome took Etruscan augury and made it Roman religion. Rome took Etruscan alphabet and made it Latin script. Rome took Etruscan engineering and made it Roman roads and aqueducts. Everything you fought to defend was destroyed and yet somehow preserved, scattered into fragments, but never entirely lost. You died believing your civilization ended, but civilizations So there it is. The Etruscans didn't vanish dramatically. They faded, absorbed into Roman civilization like ink dissolving in water. No single moment destroyed them, just the slow grinding of history, the patient victory of Rome over everyone who came before. You followed one warrior through Veii's final days, but his story was multiplied thousands of times across Etruria. Cities falling, families scattered, languages forgotten, until nothing remained but archaeological fragments and Latin words with mysterious Etruscan roots. But here's the thing. You're lying in bed right now, comfortable and safe, 2,000 years distant from that suffering. The warrior's pain is ancient dust. Sleep well, knowing that all struggles end eventually, even civilizations. The Romans seemed eternal, but they fell too. Everything passes. Everything rests.